Hi there, I'm Ryan Everson, Editor-in-Chief of the Catholic Millennial, and today I'm going to talk with you about Holy Week, because guess what? It is Holy Week. We're almost there, almost at Easter, but we can't fly through this last week because this last week is the most important one. So one of the really beautiful things about the Catholic Church and Christianity is the celebration of Holy Week, where we celebrate Palm Sunday and the Last Supper on Holy Thursday, and the Lord's crucifixion on Good Friday before finally celebrating the resurrection for Easter. It's a really wonderful tradition, and it's a tradition that's really enlightening to participate in, because if we don't observe Holy Week, then we're just jumping straight to Easter. And if we just jump straight to Easter, then we're missing the meat of the story. If we jump straight to Easter, we're missing not just the climax of Lent, we're missing the climax of the entire Bible. We're missing the climax of the most important story in human history. We're missing the fact that Jesus actually died, not just quietly and quickly in privacy, but that he died an excruciating death in pain and humiliation. And if we miss that, we miss what really makes Christianity a special religion. You know, the secular world sometimes tells us that all suffering is bad, that all suffering is pointless even, and that if God exists, then all this suffering we have doesn't make sense. The world tells us that suffering oftentimes points to the belief that God doesn't exist. But Christianity presents some really serious challenges to that idea, because Christianity says that Jesus, the God himself, underwent some of the greatest pain and persecution and humiliation that the world could possibly inflict on him. Think about what Jesus went through, being abused verbally and physically as he marched with the cross to his slow and painful death. And then think of Mary, the Mother of God, who was without sin. And despite being completely without sin, despite doing absolutely nothing wrong, God made her see her own son put through all of this. She had to see the soldiers striking him and spitting on him and calling him every kind of evil before finally killing him. Think about that, what that must have been like. Think for yourself what that must have been like as a mother to see your child go through all of that. Think of yourself in that situation. Think of seeing the one human being on earth who you love more than anybody else go through that in front of all these people. Think of the one human being on this earth who you love more than anyone being tortured and disrespected like that. I think it's really important for us to think about this because it helps us recognize that God made the most holy human beings ever go through some of the greatest suffering ever. You know, in our daily lives, we're experiencing all kinds of pain and struggles and hardships. People have health issues themselves, they have health issues with their family members, and people all across the world have financial hardships, possibly of little or no fault of their own. And people have relationship issues, and people have been betrayed, people have been lied to, and sometimes this pain even comes from people who are Christians, people who are supposed to be leaders in the church and supposed to be doing good things. And in the midst of all those different issues, a lot of people ask, if God exists, why does he let this happen? Why me? What did I deserve to go through all this? Why are these Christian people and leaders not doing what they say they should be doing? If God is real, how's he let that happen? So, you know, people are asking these questions, which is completely rational and completely reasonable. I'd even say it's quite good to ask those questions, because when people ask those questions, either consciously or subconsciously, what they're trying to do is they're trying to see the world the way God sees it. And they're trying to see the world the way that God sees it, because sometimes the way we see the evil and suffering and hypocrisy of the world doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And because of that, some people eventually come to the conclusion that, well, maybe all this means that God doesn't actually exist after all. So a few things here, building off of that idea. First, the evil of issue among Christians themselves. So the prime example of that in the Bible that we actually observe during Holy Week is Judas Iscariot. So Judas was one of the 12 apostles. He was one of Jesus' closest followers. So he's supposed to be this super loving, selfless, holy man, right? He was supposed to be a saint, just like all the other apostles became saints. But he didn't, because Judas used his free will, which was given to him by God. And he used his power as a religious leader. He used his power in his relationship with Jesus to kill Jesus. He used his power as a religious leader to kill an innocent man, which is quite obviously a terrible, terrible thing. But did Jesus cease to be God because one of his followers, who he chose, betrayed him and his values? Does Jesus cease to be God because his followers can abuse their free will? No. Jesus is still God. And Holy Week reminds us of that God's existence and his love and his goodness and truth are not dependent on something as fragile and corruptible as the free will of mankind. It reminds us that even though terrible things happen in the world, God's existence is far greater than all of that. His love is greater than all of that. It's greater than the murder of his own son. And after all that, after all the pain and injustice and suffering, Easter reminds us that at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, evil never gets the last word. Evil never gets the last word. Because after this life, God takes those who love him, and by his grace and mercy, he brings them into heaven with him for the remainder of eternity. We have to live on earth with unjust suffering, just like Jesus did. But after we die on earth, we can also receive life again like Jesus did. God doesn't make us go through anything that he didn't make his own son go through. And most of us, especially those of us in the Western world in the 21st century, he makes us go through way less suffering than he made his own son go through, than he made Jesus go through. So one lifetime on earth of suffering. And for that small price, for that cost, we can experience eternity in heaven. After a relatively short period of pain, we can experience eternity in paradise. And that is why Holy Week is important. I'm Ryan Everson for Catholic.net. God bless and have a wonderful Holy Week.